I knew something was off the moment I saw my barn door swinging open in the dead of night. The wind howled through the fields, carrying the faint scent of hay and something else. Perfume? My flashlight flickered over the wooden beams, illuminating a shadowy figure inside. At first, I thought it was a raccoon or maybe a lost dog, but then came the unmistakable sound of a woman shrieking. "Close that light, you're blinding me!" My stomach clenched. I knew that voice. It was Karen, my insufferable, nosy, lawsuit-threatening neighbor, trespassing. Again. I let out a slow breath, gripping the edge of the door as I took in the scene. Karen stood in the middle of my barn, one hand on her hip, the other holding her little designer purse like she was inspecting a crime scene. Beside her, her tiny, trembling dog was happily ripping open a 50-pound sack of cattle feed, scattering pellets all over the floor. My 2 barn cats sat on a hay bale, watching the entire debacle like it was the best entertainment they'd seen all week. Karen, dressed in her usual expensive, impractical outfit, scowled at me as if I was the one trespassing. "I knew it," she barked. "You're running some kind of illegal operation in here. I have every right to check." I just stared at her, blinking slowly, as if that would somehow make sense of what she had just said. I had dealt with Karen's antics before, complaints about my tractor noise, rants about the smell of farm animals, even her ridiculous petition to clean up the countryside, but this was new. "You have every right to check?" I echoed, incredulous. "On my private property?" Karen sniffed, brushing some imaginary dust off her sleeve. "Well, someone has to. Who knows what kind of filth you're keeping in here? I can already tell there are serious health violations." I glanced at the 2 sleepy cows chewing cud in their stalls, completely unbothered by the unwanted visitor. My horse, Daisy, flicked her tail lazily. If anything, the only health violation in here was Karen's overpowering perfume, which was enough to knock a grown man unconscious. Before I could tell her to get the hell out, she took out her phone and started snapping pictures. "This is all evidence," she declared. "The town council will be hearing about this." That was it. I was done. With the smoothest motion, I stepped outside and yanked the heavy wooden door shut behind me. Click. The lock slid into place. For a moment there was silence. Then, from inside, a muffled screech. "Hey! What are you doing? Let me out!" I leaned against the barn, letting out a long, satisfied sigh. "Nah. I think I'll let the sheriff handle this one." The banging started immediately. "This is illegal. This is false imprisonment. I have rights." "So do I called back. "The right to protect my property. And the right to call the law on trespassers." There was a beat of silence, then the dramatic gasp of someone who had never faced consequences in her life. "My dog is in here. He needs medical attention. You're endangering a small, defenseless animal." I glanced at the dog. It had now fully immersed itself in a pile of feed, tail wagging. Pretty sure it was living its best life. "You mean the one happily eating all my livestock feed?" "Yeah, looks real endangered." The screaming continued. Threats of lawsuit. Wild accusations. At one point, she even tried to convince me that she was conducting a citizen's inspection because she had received anonymous complaints about my farm. I doubted that, considering the only complaints ever came from her. I took my sweet time dialing Sheriff Hank, explaining the situation in the calmest voice I could manage. "Yep, that's right. She's in the barn. No, I didn't lure her in there. She walked in by herself. No, she's not injured, except maybe her ego." As I spoke, the barn rattled from Karen kicking the door. "I know the mayor. I'll have your farm shut down. I'll have you arrested." Sheriff Hank chuckled on the other end. "Sit tight, John. I'll be there in 10. I crossed my arms and listened to the chaos inside. There was the sound of something falling over, a bucket, maybe, followed by an even angrier shriek. "This place is a safety hazard. You're going to get sued into the ground." "I'll add that to the list," I muttered, amused. A few minutes later, I heard Karen trying a different tactic. Her voice softened, suddenly dripping with fake sweetness. "John," she cooed, as if she hadn't spent the last 15 minutes threatening my livelihood, "let's be reasonable. This is all just a misunderstanding. I thought I saw something suspicious and, well, I accidentally stepped inside. You understand, right?" I smirked. "Sure. I understand that you're trespassing." There was a long pause. Then, very quietly, I think I might be having an asthma attack." I rolled my eyes. "Karen, you've been screaming for 15 minutes straight." She huffed. "Well, it's starting now." The flashing blue and red lights of the sheriff's truck appeared at the end of the driveway, cutting off any further nonsense. I greeted Hank as he stepped out, thumbs hooked in his belt loop. He tilted his hat back, listening to the muffled shouting from inside the barn. "You know," he mused, "I always figured it'd come to this." I shrugged. "She left me no choice." Hank knocked on the barn door, his voice carrying an unmistakable authority. "Ma'am, this is Sheriff Hank. I suggest you calm down before we add resisting to the list." The barn fell eerily silent. Then, after a moment, Karen's voice piped up, suddenly docile. "Oh, Sheriff. Thank goodness you're here. You need to arrest this man. He locked me in here illegally." Hank looked at me, unimpressed. I simply raised an eyebrow. "She walked in on her own." Karen let out a nervous chuckle. I was investigating. He's running an unsafe environment. I have evidence." Hank sighed, rubbing his temples. "Ma'am, you're trespassing. And that means you're the one in trouble." The barn door creaked open, and Karen stumbled out, red-faced and covered in hay. Her dog trotted out behind her, tail wagging, with a full belly and a smug look. Karen straightened her jacket, shooting me a glare as if I was the villain in all of this. "You'll regret this," she hissed. I tipped my hat. "Looking forward to it." Hank shook his head. "Ma'am, I'm gonna have to fine you for this." Karen gasped, clutching her chest like she had just been sentenced to life in prison. You can't fine me. I was the victim here." Hank wasn't having it. "You're lucky I don't take you in for trespassing. Now, go home." She stormed off, muttering about calling her lawyer. She didn't have one, and I watched as she stomped down the driveway. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace settle over my land. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Karen never backed down. And if she thought this humiliation was bad, she was about to learn the hard way that revenge doesn't always go as planned. The moment I locked that barn door, I knew I had started something bigger than just dealing with a trespassing neighbor. Karen was not the kind of person to accept consequences quietly. From the other side of the wooden door, her muffled threats and insults continued, ranging from legal threats to exaggerated cries for help. The sheer volume of her shouting made me wonder if she had some kind of built-in megaphone. I leaned against the barn wall, watching the night sky stretch above my farm. The sheriff was on his way, and for once, I wasn't the one with a problem. The barn itself was sturdy, built decades ago by my grandfather, and if it could withstand tornadoes, it could handle one loud, entitled neighbor. Suddenly, Karen changed tactics. The screaming stopped. The silence was almost worse. I knew her type well enough to know she wasn't giving up. She was recalculating. Then, her voice came again, softer now, dripping with false sincerity. "John, let's talk about this. I think there's been a big misunderstanding." I smirked. "The only misunderstanding here is that you thought you could walk into my barn like you own it." She let out a forced laugh. "Oh, come on. I was just making sure everything was up to code. You know, for the safety of the community." I shook my head, amazed at how easily she spun her own version of reality. "Pretty sure you're not the town inspector, Karen." "Well, someone has to do it. You farmers think you can just do whatever you want, but there are rules. There are standards. And you don't get to enforce them." She huffed loudly. Then came a loud thud against the door. Either she had kicked it or she had thrown something. This is illegal. You're going to regret this. I'll have your entire farm shut down. I know important people. I pulled out my phone, dialing Sheriff Hank once again just to check on his arrival. He picked up on the second ring. Yeah, I'm almost there. Just past the gas station. You might want to hurry. She's going full tantrum in there. Hank chuckled. Sounds about right. Sit tight. As I waited, a set of headlights appeared down the long driveway, but it wasn't the sheriff. Instead, a sleek white SUV pulled up, and I groaned as I recognized it. Karen's self-proclaimed friends, more like minions from the HOA, probably summoned by a dramatic text message she had managed to send from inside the barn. The doors opened, and out stepped 3 women, all dressed as if they were about to attend a brunch meeting rather than deal with a rural property dispute. One of them, a woman named Linda, folded her arms and gave me a disapproving look. John, open the door. This has gone far enough. I sighed. Linda, your friend broke into my barn. She was concerned. I raised an eyebrow. She was trespassing. A second woman, a younger one who I vaguely recognized from the HOA meetings, shook her head in exaggerated disappointment. You trapped her. That's basically kidnapping. I scoffed. She walked in. I just made sure she stayed long enough for the sheriff to deal with her. Karen's voice came through the barn door again, clearly realizing she had backup. Ladies, you have to get me out of here. This is inhumane. Linda rolled her eyes. John, I get that Karen can be difficult, but you can't just keep her locked in a barn like an animal. I gave them a pointed look. If she didn't want to be treated like a trespasser, she shouldn't have trespassed. Before they could argue further, the distant rumble of an engine announced the arrival of Sheriff Hank's truck. He pulled in slowly, parking beside my tractor. The second he stepped out, he took one long look at the scene, the barn, me, the HOA ladies, and sighed like a man who had dealt with this nonsense one too many times. He tipped his hat. All right, what's the problem this time? Linda marched up to him, arms flailing dramatically. The problem is that John illegally detained a woman inside his barn. Hank blinked. You mean the woman who illegally entered his barn in the first place? Linda opened her mouth, hesitated, then settled on, well, that's not the point. It's exactly the point. Karen, seizing her moment, let out another dramatic cry from inside. Sheriff, I was trying to protect the community. John is running an unsafe, unsanitary, and frankly disgusting farm. I had to investigate. You must arrest him for trapping me in here. Hank, clearly unamused, walked to the barn, unlocked the door, and swung it open. Karen came stumbling out, covered in bits of hay and dust, her fancy shoes scuffed beyond repair. Her little dog, looking quite pleased with itself, trotted out after her. Hank rested his hands on his belt. Ma'am, you do realize that what you did tonight was a crime, right? Karen's face went from red with anger to pale with shock. What? Me? I was checking on things. You don't understand. He could be hiding violations. He could be endangering the town. Hank held up a hand, stopping her rambling. I don't care what you thought you were doing. The fact is, you were trespassing. And that comes with consequences. Karen's eyes widened. You can't be serious. I was just trying to help. He should be arrested. Hank sighed. No, ma'am. What's going to happen is that you're getting fined for trespassing. And if I hear about you stepping foot on this property again without permission, you will be arrested. Karen looked like she was about to explode. Her entire face twitched with outrage as she clutched her purse tightly, as if sheer willpower would reverse the situation. The HOA ladies, realizing that their rescue mission had failed, stepped back awkwardly. You'll regret this, Karen hissed at me under her breath. I smirked. Already enjoying it. Hank pulled out his notepad, writing up the official citation. Karen continued to huff and mutter under her breath about how she was going to report this to some higher authority, though she never specified who exactly would care about her self-inflicted barn disaster. As she stomped back to her car, Her dog stopped to take one last sniff around before lifting its leg and peeing directly onto Karen's designer purse. A long silence followed. Linda, still standing nearby, gasped. "Oh my!" Karen let out a strangled scream. "Muffin, no!" I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. Hank didn't even try to hide his smirk as he handed her the ticket. "Have a nice night, ma'am." With that, she stormed off, slamming her car door so hard I thought the window might shatter. The HOA ladies awkwardly shuffled back to their SUV, clearly realizing they had backed the wrong horse in this argument. As they drove off, Hank turned to me, shaking his head. "You really know how to keep things interesting around here, don't you?" I shrugged. "Not my fault Crazy keeps walking into my barn." Hank laughed, tucking his notepad away. "Well, if I were you, I'd keep an eye out. Something tells me she ain't done yet." I nodded, watching the dust settle as Karen's car disappeared down the road. I had a feeling this wasn't over either. If I knew Karen, she wasn't the type to lick her wounds quietly. She'd be back with something bigger, something more ridiculous. And when that happened, I'd be ready. I woke up the next morning to an eerie silence. No banging on my fence, no shouting from across the property line, no HOA minions marching up my driveway. Karen had stormed off the night before with a ticket in her hand and dog urine on her designer bag, and I had half expected her to come back swinging. But nothing. That should have been a relief, but instead, it put me on edge. Karen never backed down this easily. If she wasn't screaming, she was scheming. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stepped onto my porch, scanning the horizon. My farm stretched out in all directions, peaceful and untouched. The cows grazed lazily in the pasture, the chickens pecked at the ground, and my old barn cats lounged in a sunny patch of dirt. Everything seemed fine. And yet, I had a bad feeling. My phone buzzed, and I glanced at the screen. A message from my buddy Rick, who ran the local hardware store. "Might want to check Facebook. Your neighbor's at it again." I groaned. I wasn't much for social media, but Karen lived for it. Sure enough, when I pulled up the town's community page, there it was. A long, dramatic post from Karen, detailing how she had been falsely imprisoned by a dangerous, unhinged farmer who had attacked her for simply trying to protect the neighborhood. She claimed I had booby-trapped my barn to keep people out and that my animals were living in squalid, inhumane conditions. The post was riddled with capital letters and excessive punctuation, making it clear she had typed it out in a full-blown rage. The comments were what really got me. Instead of rallying behind her, most people were either laughing or calling her out. "Wait, you went into his barn without permission? That's literally trespassing. Lady, he locked you in? More like you locked yourself in. Booby traps? What is this, Home Alone, Farm Edition?" I smirked as I scrolled through, watching Karen's plan backfire in real time. Even her usual HOA allies weren't defending her this time. People in town had put up with her antics for too long, and now they were finally seeing her for what she was. But I knew Karen wouldn't take this humiliation lightly. If she couldn't win people over with sympathy, she'd try something else. That something else showed up later that afternoon. I was repairing part of my fence when I noticed a section near the far edge of my property had been mysteriously cut open. At first, I thought maybe an animal had gotten tangled up in it, but as I got closer, I saw the clean slices through the wire. Someone had done this on purpose, and I had a pretty good idea who. Before I could even react, I heard a familiar screech. "Aha! Caught you!" I turned slowly, already regretting it. There she was. Karen, standing a few feet away with her phone held up like she was filming the next big expose. She had that smug look on her face, the kind that usually meant she thought she had the upper hand. I sighed. "What now, Karen?" "Oh, don't play dumb. I have proof." She spun her phone around, showing a shaky video of the fence. "This is a clear violation. This proves that your farm is unsafe, and your animals are escaping into the neighborhood." I crossed my arms. "You mean the fence that you just cut?" Her eyes widened in fake outrage. How dare you accuse me? I found it like this. It's my duty as a responsible citizen to report these things. I glanced at her purse. The same little pink-handled wire cutters she had used to slice open the fence were sticking out, plain as day. I pointed. Yeah? Then what's that? Karen yanked her purse behind her back like a guilty kid caught stealing from the cookie jar. That's none of your business. I shook my head, taking a deep breath to keep my patience intact. You realize you're on camera, right? I pointed to the small security camera mounted on the barn, the one that had caught her entire little stunt. For the first time, she hesitated. Her eyes flickered to the camera, then back to me. That footage is probably fake. I pulled out my phone and tapped a few buttons, bringing up the live feed. There she was, in crystal clear quality, cutting the fence with her little wire cutters. I turned the screen toward her. Looks pretty real to me. Karen's mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air. Then, instead of admitting defeat, she did what Karen always did, she doubled down. That camera is an invasion of my privacy. I could sue you for recording me without my permission. I let out a laugh. Karen, you're on my property. You don't have privacy here. Her face turned an impressive shade of red. This isn't over, she shrieked before storming off, her tiny dog struggling to keep up with her furious pace. I watched her leave, shaking my head. This woman had no limits. Later that night, I sent the footage to Sheriff Hank. His response came quick. Don't even need to ask. I'll handle it. The next morning, I heard the sirens before I saw them. 2 sheriff's deputies pulled up in front of Karen's house, and within minutes, she was on her front porch, wildly gesturing and arguing as they handed her another citation, this time for property damage. She looked ready to explode. I half expected her to throw herself onto the ground and start rolling around in protest. I sat back on my porch with a fresh cup of coffee, watching the show. It was better than anything on TV. A week passed, and for the first time since Karen moved in, things were quiet. No yelling. No surprise visits. No fake complaints to the city. Then one morning, something unexpected happened. A for sale sign appeared in Karen's front yard. I blinked, rubbing my eyes just to make sure I wasn't seeing things. But there it was, big and bold. Karen was leaving. The town's Facebook group exploded with speculation. Is she really moving? Did the farm guy finally break her? Did she lose another lawsuit? I didn't care why. I just knew that, for the first time in months, I could step outside without bracing for another ridiculous battle. The barn doors stayed shut. The fence stayed intact. My farm was mine again. A few days later, I saw Karen loading up her SUV, her expression bitter and angry as she threw bags into the trunk. I walked to the edge of my driveway, casually sipping my coffee. Need help packing? She shot me a glare that could have melted steel. I hope you're happy. You've ruined my life. I shrugged. Didn't need my help for that. With one last furious huff, she slammed her car door and peeled out of the driveway, leaving a trail of dust behind her. I stood there for a long moment, letting the silence settle in. Then, for the first time in months, I smiled. Peace had finally returned to my farm, and I intended to enjoy every second of it.